بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أما بعد. Today, the 14th of Dhul Hijjah of the year 1444 Hijri, coinciding with the 2nd of July 2023, we're going to begin the third and final book in this series, Madinah Book 3. And inshallah, we aim to go through this book in a similar manner to the previous two books. Madinah Book 3 is the chunkiest, or you could say the longest or the biggest of the three books in the series, and rightly so. So the author, he's building us up slowly. And this is what you find when you're seeking knowledge, that the mutun, or the syllabus in any science, begins from small to big. You begin with a small book, and then in the next book in the series is slightly bigger, and then it gets bigger and bigger. And the reason for this is because when a student begins with a small book and he completes it, it gives him motivation, it inspires him, it makes him taste knowledge, the sweetness of knowledge, and makes him believe and makes him optimistic that knowledge is something which is easy, as opposed to starting with something which is big. If you start with a big book, the student knowledge will probably be put off by it and believe or become pessimistic and feel that knowledge is something which is difficult, and this might be an obstacle. So this is why we have in Book 3, is the chunkiest of the three books. Book 3, inshallah, should not be difficult for one who has studied Book 1 and Book 2 and understood the contents of those two books. Inshallah ta'ala, most of the contents in Book 2 have already, or in Book 3, have already been covered in the previous two books, except that now we're going to be explaining things in more detail, and there's going to be some additions. Otherwise, the principles and the foundations have already been laid down in Book 1 and Book 2. Madinah Book 3 consists of 34 lessons, as you can see in the contents page. It's advisable that a person pauses the video and reads through the contents page, just so that they have an overview of what's going to be studied, inshallah. The reason why we chose to go through Madinah Book 3, although I did mention when we first started that we'll go through Madinah Book 1, Madinah Book 2, and then go straight into Ajrumiyah and skip Madinah Book 3. But I've had a change of heart. And the reason why I changed my mind and decided to go over Book 3 rather than go to Ajrumiyah is in order to complete the series. Because when you leave something incomplete, you find that the heart is always attached and inquisitive of that thing which you have left off. It's like someone telling you a story, and then midway they say to you, okay, I'm going to tell you a different story. Although he's going to be telling you a different story, perhaps it's even a better story than the first, your heart is still going to be attached to the first story. You're always going to be wondering what happened next. So in the same way, rather than leaving you wondering what's happening next, by jumping onto Ajrumiyah, we said let's complete Madinah Book 3 and complete this series, so that a person's heart is not attached to a different book, and therefore is not going to be fully with us when we do Ajrumiyah. So let's complete Madinah Book 3, inshallah, and then we'll start Ajrumiyah bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for success. So inshallah, by now you've paused the video and you've looked over the contents of Madinah Book 3. We begin today, inshallah, with lesson 1. We're not going to go over lesson 1, rather we're going to give a summary of the contents. الدرس الأول, lesson 1, الإعراب والبناء. The main topic of lesson 1 is الإعراب والبناء. We've mentioned these words previously. I'rab is the changing of the harakah of the last letter in a word. So al-mudarrisu, mudarrisa, mudarrisi. This is i'rab, the changing of the last harakah in a mu'rab word. This changing only occurs with words which are mu'rab. this changing is called i'rab. The word that has these changes applied is called mu'rab. So this is a mu'rab word. Why? Because i'rab has been implemented, or it allows i'rab to apply onto it. The opposite of i'rab is bina. Bina is the fixation, the lack of changing, lack of declension. So, for example, ha'ula'i, 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 fixed in all cases, regardless of what amil has come before it. It still has a kasra. It does not change, which is different to the mu'rab word. The word that does not allow change is called mabni. Mabni. And the fixation is called bina. Bina is the fixation. The word that accepts bina is called a mabni word. This word is mabni because it allows al-bina. It allows for it to be fixed and remain unchanged. The word that allows change, allows i'rab, is called mu'rab. We're going to explain this in more detail, inshallah. This is just a summary of what we're going to be studying. So the main topics that are covered in ad-dars al-awwal is al-i'rab wal-bina. I'rab meaning the changing, and bina, the lack of changing, the fixation or non-declension, they call it. طيب. So i'rab and bina applies in al-asma' and it applies in al-af'al, which is why this lesson is quite a long lesson. It's going to be divided into two parts. The author speaks about the i'rab and bina as it relates to the asma, and he's going to speak about al-i'rab wal-bina as it relates to the af'al, the verbs. He's not going to speak about the huruf. We did mention in lesson 1 of book 1, if you remember, that the words in the Arabic language are divided into 3: ism, fi'l, harf. I'rab and bina only apply to ism and fi'l. That's why lesson 1 is broken up into 2 parts, not 3 parts. Why? Because in huruf, there is no categorization of the harf into mu'rab and mabni. I'rab and bina does not apply. All huruf are mabni. So that's why we don't need to discuss it. This categorization does not apply in the huruf because all huruf are mabni. Fi will remain fi regardless. All huruf are mabni, whether they are huruf jar, whether they are huruf which make the word mansub, whether they are huruf which make the word after it majzoom, whether they are asma'ul istifham. Any harf from the huruf in the Arabic language, the particles, they are all mabni. So that's why we don't explain i'rab and bina as it relates to huruf. So lesson 1 is split into 2 parts. The topic is al-i'rab wal-bina, and this applies in asma and in the af'al, in the nouns and in the verbs. طيب. As it relates to the asma, when we speak about i'rab and bina in asma, it's very easy. Why is it easy? Because nouns are assumed to be mu'rab. That's the original state, unless stated otherwise. Whenever you come across a noun, just assume that it is mu'rab, because this is the original state. There are exceptions though. The exceptions are limited to a handful, you could say. The author is going to mention some of these exceptions. These exceptions are when the ism becomes mabni. He's going to mention from the exceptions dama'ir, pronouns. Pronouns are nouns, but these types of nouns are all mabni. Dama'ir, huwa is always going to remain with a fatha on the waw. Huwa is not going to change, so it's mabni. Hum, the sukoon on the mim, mabni, fixed. Anta, antum, ana. Whether dhamir is munfasil, detached, or muttasil, attached, is always going to be mabni, fixed. So the mabni from the asma are limited to a certain group of words which are going to be mabni. Otherwise, generally speaking, nouns are mu'rab. Nouns are mu'rab. So we have dama'ir. From the words which are mabni, asma'ul ishara, hadha, hadhihi, and to the end of them. We're going to speak about the lesson in more detail. This is just a summary, inshallah. Asma'ul mawsula, the relative pronouns, they are also mabni. Asma'ul istifham, the interrogative pronouns, are also mabni. Some of the dhuruf, not all, are mabni. Asma'ul af'al, this is something new that we have not taken previously. We're going to explain it, inshallah. They are also mabni. Al-a'dad al-murakkaba, the compound numbers from 11 to 19. Both parts are mabni. If you remember, ahada ashara, tis'ata ashara, up to 19. طيب. So these are the exceptions. You memorize these exceptions. Once you memorize these exceptions, anything which does not fall into these exceptions, they are mu'rab. They are mu'rab. Then the author is going to speak about the alamat al-i'rab, the signs of i'rab. What are we looking for to determine that this word is mu'rab? There's going to be signs. What are these signs? There are signs such as dhamma, fatha, kasra. And these signs are either primary signs, asliya, or far'iyya, secondary signs. The primary signs are dhamma, fatha, kasra, which we learn in book 1. So Muhammadun, Muhammadin, Muhammadan. We're looking for fatha, we're looking for kasra, we're looking for dhamma. We don't speak about tanween, fathatain, kasratain, dhammatain. If you remember, the additional fatha, the additional kasra, the additional dhamma is a noon sakina. That noon sakina is a harf. Muhammadan, Muhammadin, Muhammadan. It doesn't count when it comes to looking for the signs. It's one of the dhammas, one of the kasras, and one of the fathas that play the alama. Is actually the alama of i'rab. So that's why we don't say dhammatain, fathatain, kasratain. It's just one dhamma. The second dhamma is tanween. طيب. So the dhamma is a primary sign indicating that a word is marfu'. The fatha is the primary sign to indicate that a word is mansub. The kasra is the primary sign to indicate that a word is majur. So if you see Muhammadun, Muhammadun is marfu'. Why is it marfu'? What's the sign of it marfu'? There's a dhamma at the end. Muhammadin, Muhammadin is majrur. Why is it majrur? Because there's a kasra at the end. Muhammadan, Muhammadan is mansub. Why? Because there's a fatha at the end. Likewise, al-masjida is mansub. Why? Because there's a fatha. Al-masjidi is majrur. Why? Because a kasra. Al-masjidu is marfu' because it has a dhamma at the end. So these are the primary signs. Dhamma, fatha, kasra. Then we have secondary signs. And these secondary signs apply in certain words. So in Jam'ul Muannath al-Salim, for example, which is the word which is made plural by addition of alif and ta. So muslimatun is singular, muslimatun is plural. Muslimatun is marfu'. The sign of marfu' is dhamma, which was a primary sign. Muslimatin is majrur. The sign of majrur is a kasra, which is a primary sign. And then to make it mansub, we have muslimatin again. We don't say muslimatan. There's no such thing as muslimatan for Jam'u Muannath Salim. So it takes a kasra when it's supposed to be mansub also. It takes a kasra when it's majrur, and it takes a kasra again when it's supposed to be mansub. So here the kasra is a secondary sign. Why? Because the primary sign is a fatha. So anything other than a fatha coming as a sign to show that this word is mansub is going to be a secondary sign. Any sign other than a dhamma coming to show that this word is marfu' is going to be a secondary sign. Any sign other than a kasra showing that this word is majur is going to be considered a secondary sign. That's what we mean by primary and secondary. Primary are these ones for this particular case ending, for these particular case endings, and anything aside from these three for these particular case endings are going to be considered as secondary signs. So with the Jam'u Muannath Salim, we have two primary signs because muslimatun, the dhamma is there, which is a primary sign, and muslimatin, when it's majur, is a primary sign. But for nasb, muslimatin, we have a kasra rather than the primary sign, which is supposed to be a fatha. So we have a kasra coming as a secondary sign. So the author is going to mention words where they have secondary signs that we need to look for rather than the primary signs. So here in this example, we're looking for one secondary sign and two primary signs. Mamnu' min as-sarf. These are things that we've already covered previously. Inshallah, we're going to speak about this in more detail. So the point of this section here is to teach you the primary signs and the secondary signs of al-raf', al-nasb, al-jar, which are the three case endings in nouns. In nouns, there are three case endings. Word is either marfu', mansub, or majur. That is if the noun is mu'rab. And this is what this section is speaking about, right? It's speaking about the mu'rab nouns. The mabni nouns are the ones that have been mentioned here. Anything aside from these are going to be mu'rab. So if a word is mu'rab, you have to look for its case ending. The case endings are going to be one of three. And the signs are these primary signs, and there are secondary signs, which we will discuss in more detail, inshallah, next lesson. And these secondary signs, you look for them in particular words like Jam'u Annath Salim. In some cases, you have a primary sign and you have secondary sign. Mamnu' min as-sarf, you have primary sign and secondary sign. So let's just explain it. Alamat al-jar fihi al-fatha. With the mamnu' min as-sarf, like Ahmadu, for example. Ahmad is an example of a mamnu' min as-sarf noun. When it's marfu', Ahmadu, the dhamma is there. That's a primary sign. When it's mansub, Ahmada is fatha, primary sign. But when it's majroor, rather than taking a kasra, it takes a fatha. It takes a fatha, which is a secondary sign coming as a sign of jar. So anything other than kasra coming to show that the word is majroor is going to be considered as a secondary sign. And you can say the same for the rest. With Asma'ul Khamsa, we have no primary signs. There's no primary signs. We're not looking for dhamma, fatha, kasra. Rather, we're looking for waw. So waw is a secondary sign that shows that the Asma'ul Khamsa are marfu'. When they are mansub, these words, Asma'ul Khamsa, the 5 nouns, special nouns, when they're mansub, we're going to be looking for an alif rather than a fatha. When they're majroor, we're going to be looking for a ya rather than a kasra. So that's 3 so far where there's going to be exceptions in terms of we look for secondary signs rather than primary signs in some of the case endings. Likewise, Jam' Mudhakkar Salim. Mudhakkar Salim, we're not looking for fatha, kasra, dhamma as alamat al-i'rab. Rather, we're looking for waw to show that this word is marfu'. We're looking for ya when it's in the mansub state and when it's in the majroor state. So muslimuna, muslimina, muslimina. Muslimuna, waw shows that it's marfu'. Muslimina, ya comes for 2 signs. It represents nasb and it represents jar. Al-muthanna, the dual noun, it's marfu' with alif and majroor with ya and mansub with ya. So the ya shows 2 things as well. Just like this one, the ya comes for 2 cases, representing 2 cases. And all of these, because they are not fatha, kasra, dhamma, they're considered to be secondary signs. These are secondary signs. After that, the author, he speaks about al-i'rab al-taqdiri. Al-i'rab al-taqdiri is estimated i'rab because there are some words which are mu'rab. They are mu'rab, but the case endings, we do not see the changes being applied to the end of these words. We don't see the changes being applied to these words, but they are still mu'rab. The alamat are going to be estimated. They are taqdiri, muqaddar. They are estimated, assumed. And the author, he gives 3 types of nouns where the i'rab is estimated. These are al-maqsoor. What's al-maqsoor? Al-maqsoor is the word that ends with an alif, like mustashfa. Mustashfa is mu'rab. Why do we say it's mu'rab and not mabni? Even though it remains mustashfa in all 3 cases, we know that it's mu'rab because that's the origin. The asl of the noun is that it is mu'rab unless it falls into one of these categories. Does mustashfa fall into one of these mabni categories? No. So it's mu'rab. So why don't we see the dhamma, the kasra and the fatha, the ending? Why don't we see the ending changing? Because this word is maqsoor, which is a ism, which is mu'rab, that ends with an alif lazima. An alif which is always going to be there. When a word has an alif at the end, the alif is always vowelless. It doesn't carry a fatha, kasra, dhamma. It remains vowelless. So this word is mu'rab. The dhamma, the kasra and the fatha are going to be estimated depending on its position in the sentence. So if it's marfu', we say dhamma muqaddara. The alama of it being marfu' is dhamma muqaddara, a dhamma which is approximated. When it's mansub, we say fatha muqaddara. When it's majur, we say kasra muqaddara. And the same for al-fata and al-asa. So that's the first category where we have i'rab, but the alamat al-i'rab are going to be estimated, muqaddara. The second type that the author mentions is al-manqus. What's manqus? The manqus is the ism where it has, rather than an alif, it has a ya lazima, and this ya is preceded by kasra. So it ends with a ya, and the letter before the ya has a kasra. like al-qadi, al-muhami, al-thani, al-madi, al-wadi, al-ma'ani. Example of this that we took in book 2 was ghalin. Ghalin. The ya, in some cases, it's going to be removed because there's going to be iltiqa of sakinain. Ghaliyun. If you remember, we explained in book 2 that the dhamma on the ya is difficult to pronounce. So the dhamma is removed. So the ya is sakin, and the noon, the tanween, noon at tanween, is sakin as well. So iltiqa of sakinain. So we remove the ya. We remove that and it becomes ghalin. Inshallah, we'll explain it next lesson in more detail. The manqus words. So with the maqsoor, the one that ends with alif, is estimated when it's marfu, is estimated when it's majur, is estimated when it's mansub. With the manqus words, the ones that end with the ya at the end preceded by kasra, the estimation here applies in two cases. تقدر الضمة والكسرة وتظهر الفتحة. The dhamma is going to be estimated when it's marfu', and the kasra is going to be estimated when it's majur, but the fatha is going to appear. Because the fatha is a light letter, it can come on the ya. So we can say ghaliyan, we can say qadiyan, but we can't say qadiyin, qadiyun. Is too difficult. The dhamma on the ya is too difficult, and the kasra on the ya is too difficult. So rather than say qadiyun, qadiyin, it becomes qadin, qadin, qadin. The ya is omitted because of the rule of the iltiqa sakinain. So it's qadin when it's marfu' and qadin when it's majrur. What's the sign of it being marfu' and the sign of it being majrur? The dhamma muqaddara and the kasra muqaddara. Whereas with the fatha, it comes on the ya. So the ya does not need to be omitted. It will be qadiyan, muhamiyan, thaniyan, madiyan, wadiyan, ma'aniyan, ghaliyan, madiyan, and so on. طيب, so estimation here is in two cases. When it's marfu' and when it's majur. Mansub, there's no need to estimate because it's not difficult to pronounce the fatha on the ya. So that's 2 out of 3. Now the last one is any word, any mu'rab word that's mudaf to ya al-mutakallim is going to be the i'rab, the alamat al-i'rab is going to be muqaddara, estimated. So for example, zamilun, a colleague, a mate. Zamilun is mu'rab. It's a word that allows and accepts change. So we say zamilun, zamilin, zamilan. Another example, baytun, baytun, baytin, baytan. طيب. But when I make this word mudaf to myself, ascribe it to myself, my house, my colleague, the ya requires the last, the letter before to take a kasra. This ya, which is a damir, ya al-mutakallim, before it joins, it makes the noun takes a kasra. It makes the noun take a kasra. So it becomes zamili, bayti. This kasra has to remain there in all cases. It has to remain there in all cases. So this brings a problem now. Do we remove the kasra when we need to make the word marfu so that the lam has a dhamma? Because when it's marfu, it has to have a dhamma, right? When it's majrur, it has to have a kasra. When it's mansub, it has to have a fatha. Do we give priority to the alamat al-i'rab, or do you give priority to the lam having a kasra so that the ya can join? Well, here the Arabs have given priority to the kasra for the ya to join. Because they've given priority to that, it's not possible to combine two harakat on the same letter. One letter can only carry one harakah. So because we've given the kasra to the last letter before the ya joins, the alamatul i'rab in all 3 cases, raf', jar, and nasb, are going to be estimated. The dhamma, the kasra, the fatha, all 3 are going to be estimated. In all 3 cases, whenever a word is mudaf to ya al-mutakallim, the i'rab is not going to be dhahir, it's not going to be visible, present, apparent. It's going to be muqaddar. Muqaddar meaning estimated, assumed, approximated. So here, these are the 3 cases where the i'rab is going to be estimated. If the word ends with alif, like mustashfa. If a word ends with a ya preceded by a kasra, and this ya is different to ya al-mutakallim. This ya is part of the word. This ya is part of the word, whereas the ya here is ya al-mutakallim. With this ya, the word is called manqus, where there's a ya which is part of the word preceded by a kasra. This ya, the estimation is in 2 cases, when it's majroor and when it is marfu'. When it's mansub, there's no estimation because the fatha is going to be there, it's present. Mudaf to ya al-mutakallim, estimated in 3 cases. So here we learn that i'rab is two types basically. In this section, we learn that i'rab is two types. I'rab is either ظاهر, and that's the origin. That's the origin, and that's what we've been learning for most cases. Muhammadun, Muhammadin, Muhammadan. The dhamma, the kasra, the fatha is there, it's visible, you can see it. That's the first type. The second type of i'rab is where the word is mu'rab, but the changing or the harakat, the signs of i'rab is approximated, it's not seen. Yeah, and this happens in three types of words, which we have briefly explained. Inshallah, we'll explain in more detail. And then he has here a table showing you the alamat al-i'rab al-asliya al-far'iyya, the signs of al-i'rab, both primary and secondary, in nouns. Inshallah, look through this when you have time before next lesson. And then he speaks about the i'rab al-taqdiri and gives examples. He gives examples of the i'rab al-taqdiri. Also look to that, inshallah. And then here he summarizes alamat al-asliya al-far'iyya wa dhahir al-muqaddara, a summary of what we've just explained. Then we have exercises relating to what has preceded. طيب, I think I'll summarize up to here, inshallah. The lesson continues. I'll summarize up to here, and the next lesson, inshallah, we'll go from the start up to here in more detail. So this is our lesson for today. The homework is just to revise what we've taken, read over the contents page, and familiarize yourself with what we've mentioned today, inshallah, in preparation for going over what we've taken in more detail. Subhanakallah wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.